Okay, so this is really funny because they take the guy who has never really spoken on this scale before and they make him wait all day long to give his talk, right? So no nerves, no pressure whatsoever, right? So when it comes to Puppet adoption, I think that people go through various phases of this adoption and levels of maturity. And I think our story is probably similar to a lot of what you all have done. When you just start out, you're just learning Puppet. You're learning what it means to write a good module that doesn't suck, which I look back at some of my first ones. They suck pretty bad. The next level thing, once you start getting a handle on those things, you learn, there's got to be some more organization here, structure to my code, and you might look at things like roles and profiles and things like that. I see a couple of head nods. And then after all that, you think, oh, there's this really cool tool called Hira that allows me to separate my configuration data from my Puppet code. Okay? All good things. And what you're focusing on at that point is really good stuff. All you guys we're trying to configure our systems in a way that we kill snowflakes and do all the lovely things that Puppet provides us. But at a certain point, everyone comes to this realization of, how the hell am I going to deploy all of this code onto my masters in not only deploy them, but in a meaningful way, automated, such that I don't have to think about it anymore? This is exactly where R10K comes in. R10K is a very central part of our workflow. It drives all the processes. And we also use other tools like Jenkins, Capistrano, Sinatra, things like that. In fact, it was really pretty cool. Last night, I met R. Tyler Croy for the first time, who is the Jenkins project lead, and found out in conversation with him that he's actually using a very early version of the Post-Receive Hook that I published a long time ago. So that was pretty cool. So I know I've been in your guys' spot at the end of the first day of a long conference. You guys have probably sat through God knows how many talks. I know you're tired. The brain may hurt a little bit. When they told me I was going to talk at the end of the day, at first I was like, oh, God, I got to wait all day. But on the cool side, in about 45 minutes, we get beer. It's beer 30. So hang in there. We can do this together. So who am I? Who's this guy up here chatting about R10K? I'm a senior software engineer at Time Warner Cable, part of a team of full stack engineers doing a lot of DevOps-y things. We use cool tools like Puppet, Jenkins, Artifactory, Packer, Docker, OpenStack, just to name a few, Sensu and Graphite. Okay, so 3 main areas of the talk. I want to talk about some of our early days, pre-R10K, and some of the crappy things we did early on to deploy our code to the masters and whatnot, and show how we learned from early mistakes and how that led to the current workflow we use today, which is this R10 workflow. I'm going to get into that. We're going to talk about dynamic branch creation and the Puppetfile repo. We will talk and get into Puppetfile manipulation, R10K and release creation, and finally how we use Jenkins to help deploy this stuff to production. And at the end, I will be demoing some things. So I really like this slide from Merlin Man. It's a very simplistic slide, and it really resonates with me. So it really is important to understand, 1, your job, 2, the tools you want to use to accomplish and get across what you're trying to do, and then 3rd, most importantly, don't think about it anymore. Just let it work for you. In the beginning, anybody resonate with this one? Yes. Now, for those of you after this talk that still think this is a good idea, he may come and hunt you down. So Gary Larissa, the guy that introduced me, yes, this is him yelling, what the hell are you doing if you think this is a good idea? Who would do such a thing? This guy. So why the heck did we put everything in a single repo to begin with? First of all, was to simplify development. 1 repo was all we needed with all the Puppet modules and our Hira data, so it made, we didn't have to have guys going all over the place to change code. They can download 1 repo. Easy Jenkins flow. Only having one repo, we only needed a handful of Jenkins jobs to get the things we needed to done for the testing and the deployment aspect of this. And lastly, having Puppet code and Hiera together enabled everything to stay in lockstep, right? So the data is automatically in sync with the code that depends on it. So everything was easy early on. Plus, we were just starting out. We had a lot of new things to grok. At this point, we were migrating from open source Puppet to Puppet Enterprise, which has a lot of goodness in it that you guys are well aware of, like mcollective, Hiera, things like that. We also had people on the team that, some of which were new to Puppet. We had some people who had written some Puppet before. We wanted to keep the barrier to entry here low and make it simple. And last but not least, we had to get this in place quickly, because we had too many Snowflake environments. We needed to show that this stuff worked. So early days, this was the tool set that we had established. Shouldn't be too surprising. Jenkins, GitHub. We use HipChat for IM notifications, things like that. We also use Capistrano. We chose Capistrano because it's a really nice, simple tool to be able to run commands in parallel to multiple remote environments. So what is this Jenkins thing? What did it do? What you'd expect, we were writing tests. So we had RSpec Puppet. It would run syntax checking and do some linting for us. And it did it for all modules, because remember, we're in a monolithic repo. We had a single release job that would create a Git tag for us and do the versioning and push the tags up to Git. And last but not least, we had a single deploy job. And what we used, and we still use Capistrano today, but early, the Capistrano tasks were kind of these kludgy, had a lot of embedded commands, nested if-else conditions. It was just pure ugliness. But it worked. And then we had another Jenkins job for the good old Forge modules, so that we could enable people to enter in a free text form in Jenkins to say, I want this module installed, or I want this Forge module upgraded, or I want to delete it, things like that. Again, using Capistrano to wrap the Puppet module tool to do that. And it worked pretty well, until it didn't. I thought I mentioned something about kludgy Capistrano tasks. So I'm going to apologize in advance to you guys. Your eyes are about to burn. So this is a simple task to create a new environment. Kind of hard to read. Oh, that's so much better. Yes. So this illustrates kind of the ugliness I was talking about. You've got way too much logic in here. If, else, do this. CD to this directory, ampersand, ampersand, then run this command. It's really hard to read, and stuff that I don't want to maintain anymore. Whoever wrote this should be, it was this guy, sorry. The other problem we ran into was with the Forge modules. There was no way to really upgrade Forge modules without impacting every single environment we had, because we didn't have a concept of environments for the Puppet Forge modules. They just sat in a nice little module path on all the masters. So it became really, really difficult to manage versions of that, and it was a problem. So what I'm trying to tell you is simple comes at a price. I'm going to count the other ways that this started to really fail. So I only changed one module. You mean I have to wait for every test to run on all the modules before I know my change was good? Yeah. So this became the look of pretty much all of us at the time. Because you guys got to remember, setting up RSpec, you've got a lot of fixture setup, time it takes for the tests to run themselves. And last but not least, the more modules we added, the more tests we wrote, this became a compounding problem, and I was really sick of it. Here's another scenario. I only changed one module, like Tomcat, for instance. So I have to deploy everything just to test my module on the masters. Yeah, we have a big dead body floating around with us that we have to hang on to. And lastly, I only need to make a simple Hiera change. Maybe I need to just change some JVM args, right, for Tomcat. That's the only thing I need to do. I can't deploy this just a simple change. Nope. Everything comes along for the ride. And this got old really quickly. So having to wait and for simple changes, the monolith started to become really heavy, really burdensome, and people started to have really long faces at work. Not to mention that little problem where if we upgraded a Forge module, that could break production. Not good. So stop the madness. So a quick recap of the early days. We had this ugly monolithic repo running all the tests across every module, even though you may have only changed one. I can't just deploy atomically a single module. Yeah, this just didn't work out for us anymore. And by the way, there was no tie between the versions of the internal modules we developed and the Forge modules. So you can see where this is going. Not good. So we decided to change a few things. We came up with a couple new tools that we added to the process here, and it drastically improved our ability to deploy atomically a module itself or hire data itself. Tools can be very awesome. We just needed a couple more. So to revisit our little workflow diagram, again, understand it, understand your tools, and don't think about it anymore. But make the tools work for you. So here is how the tool set sits today that we use. And you're going to see the common suspects that you saw earlier, with the addition of Ruby, Sinatra, and of course, our good friend R10K. So R10K, for those of you that don't know, it really helps automate deployment, right, and environments. It provides an actual native implementation of dynamic environments. It's important to note here that R10K is a server-side component. Okay, it runs on all the masters. So it deploys all the Puppet modules, not just internal ones, but also those from the Forge. It handles all the internal Git and SVN. Sorry for using that. I feel bad for you. And it also provides caching, so it enables things to run very quickly. And a really cool feature of R10K as well is that once you're done, let's say you deploy like a dev branch and you test and you're finished with it, you delete that branch, R10K will automatically clean up and purge that environment for you on the next run. So it's pretty cool. And yes, it is wicked awesome. So to me, R10K plus Puppetfile is a match made in heaven, or Portland, as the case may be. Manages module versions, and this last bit is the biggest one for me, is that it provides this nice inventory of your Puppet environment, whether it be internal modules or Forge modules, the combination of the two. So if you've done anything with R10K or Librarian Puppet, you guys are, you all are familiar with the Puppet file format, but it's good to do a quick review here. This is a small snippet of a production Puppet file that we have. And you can see the format here. It tells you kind of the module name, where to retrieve it from, and then also the version to use. This is a really cool meta inventory of your environments. So important to note that Puppetfile does live in its own repo. Okay? Puppet environments represent the branches in your Puppetfile repo, and that's how R10K does its thing. And that's how we achieve dynamic environments. We will talk about the dynamic Puppetfile creation here in a bit. It also provides this inventory of all our modules for a given environment. And it's really nice because we finally killed our monolith. So each module in its own repo and R10K, hell yeah. So R10K deploy. There's three kind of big ways to do it. You could deploy the world. You can say, hey, R10K, go deploy every branch from my Puppetfile repo. We don't use that very much because it's very time consuming. It's pretty resource intensive. We don't have a use case for it, but it is there if you need it. There's a way to deploy just a single environment, and we use that quite often. And then also, once you have an environment deployed and it's already been established, you can, on subsequent commits, you can say, hey, just deploy this one module, not the whole thing. We use that very often. So a couple quick examples. Basically, here we are telling R10K to deploy the test environment. the -P representing the Puppet file. And here's an example of, hey, I just want to deploy my Tomcat module. I don't need to deploy everything, just deploy that single thing. So now let's revisit our Jenkins slide. Now that we have everything in its own module or own repository, now we've got a single CI job per module that does all of our work. We have a create release job, okay? And last but not least, we have for every module in the repository, a deploy job for that module. Again, we're still incorporating Capistrano to do that work for us. The tasks just look a lot nicer than previously. I think you'll agree this looks a little bit nicer than ampersand, ampersand, if then cd into. So Puppet file manipulation and branch creation, which we're moving into here. Before R10K can deploy an environment, it has to have the Puppet file branch deployed on the origin, because again, R10K runs on all the masters. It's a server-side component. So we'll talk in a minute about how these branches get created for you and pushed up. And then if you're doing iterative development, let's say I'm doing subsequent pushes, right? I push up a change, test it out, didn't work like I wanted to, or I need to add some additional functionality. How do I do that? We'll talk about that in a second. And then finally, which is really cool, is when R10K is finished deploying, I'd really like to know when it's done so I can go test. Let's look at an example. So take our good friend Tomcat. Again, this a little while back was a version of our production Puppet file, and you can see the ref points to 1.0.13. What if I need to add some functionality to Tomcat? Here we go. So I would go to my local Tomcat directory or clone it if it's not there. I'm going to make whatever changes I need to make, right? Create my branch, push it up, and there we go. What happens when I push that branch? Well, there's a process that gets involved here that creates the same name branch in your Puppet file repository. Okay, this is the dynamic branch creation. But it's not done. The next thing it does is for the module that you push the branch for, it's going to also update the Puppet file, to the git ref, to point to that branch as well. This is the dynamic Puppet file manipulation. And this basically associates my dev change foo branch of my Tomcat repo with the Puppet file branch of the same name. Next, it's going to call R10K to say, hey, R10K, do that stuff that I love that you do. Create this environment for me. And if it's not too much trouble, let me know when you're done. I know a lot of you out there going, what? How's this happening? Let's explain. So all this automation that I just kind of went through is handled by a post-receive hook, okay? And if you guys have a lot of people using Jenkins out there, you guys are probably pretty well versed in service hooks and things like that. This Sinatra post-receive hook is nothing more than a web server with running on a known port and a well-known endpoint as well. So GitHub posts, when it calls these hooks, it posts a JSON payload. And that JSON payload has some meta level info in it to tell us, well, what the heck did this push represent? Was it a branch creation? Was it just a commit? Or did we delete a branch? So things that we're very interested in. And these are the three things that the post-receive hook knows about. So take a look at the create branch. Again, when I push a branch for a module, okay, what happens is the Puppet file repo will create a branch of the same name. For the module that was pushed, it's going to update its git ref to point to that same branch. And then it's going to call R10K and then notify us in HipChat when all of this is done. Now I can go test. The modify is very similar, except it's much quicker. So now if there's a branch already out there of that name, and I do subsequent pushes in my Tomcat repo to that same branch, it's basically the hook will recognize that, hey, the Puppet file branch of that name already exists. But just for the heck of it, let's make sure that the git ref in my Puppet file still points to that same branch, and then call R10K deploy module this time, and then again, notify HipChat when we're done. delete branch, pretty self-explanatory. I'm done with my work on this little dev branch. I delete it, push it up. The hook sees that as a delete operation and basically says, oh, hey, for this branch in the Puppetfile repo, go delete it as well. And then the next time R10K runs, it'll clean up and purge that environment from your masters. So what if I want to test multiple modules in the same environment? So here I am developing on Tomcat. Maybe I have an Nginx profile or something that I need to make some associated changes with and test it out in the same environment. Let's look at that. Very similar. So I would go to my profile directory, clone it or cd into it, go ahead and create the branch of the same name that you created within your Tomcat branch or Tomcat repo. And the hook knows that the Puppetfile branch of that name already exists, and that for this module, for the profile module, it will also go and update its git ref to that branch name as well. So just for reference, the top one shows the production version of your Puppetfile before any changes happened. And the bottom shows what the status of that is after I created those two branches for each repo. So really, truly dynamic environments. And the cool thing about this is it's perfect for iterative development and testing. We all use it today. We've been using it for a long time. And like the workflow diagram says, we just don't think about it anymore. We push them up. We get notified in HipChat. I can go test now. So let's talk about this post-receive hook. What the heck is this thing? So the middleware at the heart of this is a little open source thing I just published about a week ago called Reactor. It's a modular rack app. It utilizes queuing to handle all of the requests that come in. So whether it's a create branch event, delete branch event, modify, what have you, this is what happens. So Reactor is what handles all of this dynamic Puppetfile manipulation and branch creation for us. It drives R10K. It says, hey, R10K, go do your thing. And then when it's done, it handles the notifications back to HipChat. Here's the default setup. So we use GitHub Enterprise. We use HipChat. If anyone out there is using these things, all you have to do is provide some configuration, and you can take advantage of this as well. Here's what the config looks like right now. So Reactor Puppet masters file. This is essentially just a file that contains a list of all your Puppet masters that you want R10K to run on. And this is what Capistrano uses to do its thing. The Puppetfile get URL, that's an important one. That's what handles all of this dynamic Puppetfile manipulation for you. So you pointed it at your get URL for that. And then you see some HipChat environment variables that are used as well so that we can call the HipChat API correctly. Well, what if I don't use HipChat? No worries. If you use Campfire, Slack, or something like that, as long as it has an API and you can roll a little bit of Ruby code, this is very pluggable. And if you do so, obviously be a good citizen, contribute it back, because you're going to help someone else that uses that same tool. Now, this is a tricky bit. What if I don't use GitHub or GitHub Enterprise? I'm sorry. GitLab and Bitbucket, right? A lot of people use it. Good tools. But the problem is they support webhooks, but they provide, in what I've seen so far, 0 meta level detail in their payloads. So it makes it really, really difficult to say, oh, this payload represents somebody creating a branch, or this payload represents somebody deleting the branch. It's not there. So if you're using that, we can talk later. If someone wants to try and take that on, if you're using one of those tools, I'd love to talk to you. OK, so now we're going to switch gears a bit. Let's talk about how we use R10K in a create release / deployment scenario, right, to more static environments, like a production environment. So basically, 2 simple jobs, a create release job and a ship it job. So create release, what does this thing do? So we have all of our modules in their own repo and hire data, like we talked about. If you want to create a release for one of your modules, we all know the module file has a version in it. And we have some Ruby scripts on the back end that Jenkins calls to go ahead and increment that third number. So release underscore 1.0.13 would be the original version. I go create release. Jenkins create this for me. It updates the module file to say release underscore 1.0.14. I put the version file in here for higher data because it doesn't have that meta level file to say what version it is, so that we injected our own. The Jenkins job also creates the git tag of the same name, release underscore 1.0.14, and pushes that up. Once you create a release, now it's going to be available for deployment. Again, a parameterized job. And we have basically 2 static environments, but it could be whatever you guys have. We use test and production. And then there's a drop-down list in Jenkins of all of the git tags for that particular module or higher data that you're trying to deploy. And we're going to see examples of this soon. So Puppetfile manipulation again. When I deploy, right, I want to deploy 1.0.14, whatever. It's going to change the git ref for, let's say I'm deploying to test. It's going to change the git ref in the test Puppet file to that new version that you want to deploy, and then call R10K again for us. So one-click deploy, right? That's where we're all striving for, even in Puppet land. OK, quick recap of the workflow. We went over R10K and Puppetfile. It's a match made in heaven, it really is. We went over how each module is now in its own repo. Now we've got basically atomic deployments for each module. We have post-receive hook goodness that does all of this magic for us behind the scenes that we don't have to worry about anymore. We know when we push changes, they will be on the Puppet masters. And last but not least, we showed R10K in the production deploy type of scenario. OK, enough talking in words. Let's see how this stuff works. Now, just a disclaimer, I am way too chicken shit to do live demos. I took the smart route and recorded this stuff. OK, so this first one is going to show some the R10K workflow and the dynamic environment creation. And it's going to exercise all 3 of those events: branch creation, a modification to an existing branch, and then I'm done with it, delete it. So let's start our post-receive hook. And let's open up the file, and we're going to see the logout. So going into Tomcat, we're going to create a new branch called dev underscore R10K demo. Let's take a look at the config. And we're going to add a notify that we can test with. So this just says, hey, I'm running against this new branch that we created. And we're going to commit this guy and push it up. Now, when we push this thing, we'll go back over and see some log output here from our post-receive hook. There's the payload. And there's R10K doing its thing. This is all R10K output right here. And here's our notification in HipChat that says, hey, we're deploying this new environment. So while that's running, we're going to go back over to our Puppetfile repo, and we're going to update that thing and check out this new shiny branch we just created. Let's take a look at the Tomcat git ref for this guy. And it should be dev underscore R10K demo, and there it is. And back over to HipChat, and there we go. R10K just finished deploying that environment. Now we know we can go test against this thing. In a not so test-like environment, as a couple of my colleagues will notice here, we're going to do a Puppet agent run against this new environment in no-op mode so that we can see, hopefully, that notify come through. And you can see this has taken a while. We should have, at the time I recorded this demo, it would have been really interesting to see the metrics like we saw in the keynote this morning. I'm sure this thing would have been way above the green line. Time to add a new master, I'm guessing. OK, there it's caching. And very soon we should see the output. And there you see our notify. This branch is running against the dev R10K demo branch. Now you see why I don't live demo. This would be horrible. OK, so back over to the Tomcat repository. Let's say, for argument's sake, we are done with this branch. Let's go ahead and delete it. And we will see some cleanup happen. Again, here's the standard out from our post-receive hook. Receiving that payload, it understands it's a delete. It says, I'm going to go delete the Puppetfile branch of the same name. And there, in fact, in HipChat, it tells us it deleted it. And just to prove I'm not full of shit, we're going to go to Puppetfile repo, check this thing out, and prove that, in fact, that thing was deleted. And there you go, automatic cleanup. So if R10K were to run again at this point and deploy an environment, the dev R10K demo environment would be completely pruned from all your masters automatically. Pretty cool. All right, so that's the demo for the workflow aspect of this. Let's take a look now and demonstrate the Jenkins create, release, and deploy process. So I'm going to start out here in the Puppetfile repo for the test branch, make sure I have the latest. And we're going to take a look and see what version of Tomcat it says it's using. And it's using 1.0.19, as you can see. Let's go back over to Tomcat, and let's take a look at the module file and see what it has as its version. And lo and behold, it's also at 1.0.19. So let's go to Jenkins. We're going to do a create release, and you'll see the drop-down list of all the modules that are available to do this for. We're going to select Tomcat. This runs extremely quick, and it has a good bit of output to see. As you'll see, the version before this happened was, again, 1.0.19. And the version afterwards is 1.0.20. And you can also see where it creates the tag of the same version and then pushes it up. So now we have a shiny new release of our Tomcat module. We're so proud. Now we can go update our Puppetfile repo. First, our Tomcat. And you can see it did indeed have a change. Now it's at 1.0.20. Now let's go deploy this new version we just created. So there's our two static environments, test and production. We're going to choose test, and there's all the tags we could deploy. And there's our new one. We're going to build that guy, check the output, and you can see some really nice verbose output from R10K running on every master we have. And there you see in Git, it says, yep, I just changed the ref for Tomcat in the Puppetfile repo to this new release. And I'm done. So now we have a new version of Tomcat running in our test environment. And to prove to you that I'm not lying, the Puppetfile was updated to 1.0.20. And there you have it. OK, so that ends kind of the Jenkins create, release, and deploy process. So in conclusion, what did we go over today? We learned kind of the early days of some of the stuff we were doing was good, some of it not so good. Sans R10K was not the best. Once we got R10K into the mix and a post-receive hook to kick it for us, now we've got butter in our R10K process. It's important to note, too, R10K is a very, very active project. Adrian Thibault is busting his ass working on this thing, so give him a hat tip if you see him, buy him a beer, whatever. And the point I want to make about it is some of the functionality that's in the post-receive hook now may likely one day be baked into R10K itself. But the nice thing about the webhook is you still need a way to kick R10K and also receive these really cool notifications that it's done. If you're not using R10K today, or if you're still in this crazy monolithic repo we pointed out earlier, hopefully this talk will help you on your way to getting to a more sane workflow and release process for your Puppet code. I do want to thank Adrian and Gary and Zach Smith as well. Awesome Puppet Labs guys, and their work is huge and has really helped us along the road to this workflow. So I wanted to throw in a few helpful links and resources. So if you want to see Adrian and Gary have some really good blog posts about workflow and R10K related items. And then the last one is the link to the GitHub project Reactor if you want to take a peek at that. And before we ask any questions, all right, man, it's beer 30. That's it. Any questions? Oh, well, just talk really loud. Somebody, anybody.
Could you clarify what's happening in the Puppet file when those tags changes, when the ref changes? Is there some job that's actually updating the Puppet file in Git and changing that tag? Or
Yes, so, yes, good question. Yes, in fact, there is some Ruby code that does some string manipulation with regular expressions to update that Git ref for you.
And who's executing that Ruby code?
That would be the post-receive hook. Yes, you bet.
Is that open source?
The reactor is open source.
Where?
Let me go back. The last bullet. Any other questions?
So, in your presentation, there was still like a several minute delay between like editing a file and seeing results for it. Is that the regular dev workflow for you guys, or do you have some other tool where you can edit and see the results right away?
When you say edit and it takes a while, is that when R10K runs?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So when you're creating a new environment, that's the costliest operation you have with R10K because I haven't counted, but we've got a Puppet file that has probably 25 internal modules and 15 to 20 Forge modules. And so the R10K has to go sync those guys and do some caching and things. So once you establish your initial environment creation, after that it goes really fast.
What would you say the feedback loop is between like editing a file and seeing some results? How long is that?
Oh, on a new environment?
Like in your regular workflow, so not new, on an existing one.
You mean, for instance, if I need to go change some modules, I create a new branch for those and push them up, what's the time to see those up there? Anywhere between a minute, 2 minutes, usually around a minute.
Do you have any reflections on how that might be brought down, either using this workflow or something else? Because that still feels, I mean, if you think about like a compiled application, there's a pretty heavy tax there. But for scripters, we're used to being able to just change something and see the results instantly. And so 2 minutes seems sort of like a big overhead.
Yeah, it is. And we do, I think R10K is, Adrian is working on a lot of optimizations for it. And honestly, we are a couple releases behind. Yeah, don't slap me, Adrian, if you're in here. Yeah, but there's definitely optimizations in the works. And again, it's a one-time hit. And I should point out, too, that if you have multiple people that need to create new environments that are separate, like you might create dev foo, he might create dev bar. The nice thing about Reactor is it does have queuing in place. And once, I think R10K right now uses the Puppet module tool, which isn't really happy with concurrency with Forge modules. Bad things happen. But once that gets fixed, this thing will be able to let both of you create your environments simultaneously at the same time, concurrently. So.
On the fact that you're based on GitHub, do you have integration into Travis CI as well?
We don't. If that's what you use, I would be really interested in talking to you about enabling that in Reactor. So I try to make it pluggable and extendable as possible from the non-Ruby guy in the room. Yeah.
Is there a way to say, if I name my branch in a certain manner, it doesn't kick all this off? Or is it just kind of all or nothing?
Yeah, so this framework is pretty opinionated, according to our workflow. It would be possible to add something like that in, though,
cool.
For sure. And that's why I open sourced it. So like if you were to take it and say, I need to add that capability, that would be really awesome. Any others?
In your Puppetfile repository, is the Puppetfile literally the only thing in there, or do you put your site.pp in that repo as well?
Oh, really good question. It is the only thing in the repo at this time.
I guess where do you get your site.pp from?
Yeah, that's probably a good question for the open source users. We use Puppet Enterprise, so we don't utilize a site.pp file. But that's something that if you needed added, we could probably add that for you. Anyone else?
You hinted that the post-receive hook doesn't support Bitbucket. So could you just briefly outline what might be required to implement this with Bitbucket?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was working with someone during the contributor summit to try to see what it would take to support Bitbucket. And the early readouts of that look like we may need to call into their REST API and do some retro searching. So it looks like the create might be possible, but I don't see a mechanism yet or a way to detect, let's say you deleted a branch and pushed that. I don't see a way in Bitbucket to catch that event so that we could do the auto cleanup. And that may be something we have to, Bitbucket users may have to live with that limitation. After all, the creation is the most important thing. You could always go clean up afterwards, but yeah, that's what it looks like on our early readouts. But Bitbucket users, I would welcome anyone digging into that. If you find out more info, that would be great.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, guess that's it.